A recurring vision swirls in the shared mind of the net, a vision that nearly every member glimpses, if only momentarily, of wiring human and artificial minds into one planetary soul. This incipient techno-spiritualism is all the more remarkable because of how unexpected it has been. The net, after all, is nothing more than a bunch of highly engineered pieces of rock braided together with strands of metal or glass. It is routine technology. Computers, which have been in our lives for 20 years, have made our life faster but not that much different. Nobody expected a new culture, a new thrill, or even a new politics to be born when we married calculating circuits with the ordinary telephone. But that's exactly what happened. So that's a quote from Kevin Kelly that I wanted to start things off with. In The Singularity Is Near, pioneering transhumanist Raymond Kurzweil described the end goal of a six-epoch visionary evolutionary cosmogony, claiming that, quote, once non-biological intelligence gets a foothold in the human brain, the machine intelligence in our brains will grow exponentially. Ultimately, the entire universe will become saturated with our intelligence. This is the destiny of the universe, end quote. 100 years earlier, Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society, which I'm going to refer to as just TS for shorthand, rolled out her evolutionary cosmology in the Secret Doctrine in 1888, in which the spiritual nature of human beings, along with the animal, vegetable, and mineral kingdoms, as well as the chemical elements, are all developed through a complex cyclical progression of 7 planetary stages, linked together via rounds and chains, culminating in the spiritualization of all matter in the universe. At a glance, it may seem these two conceptual models, separated by years of history, have little to do with one another. However, as I argue in this paper, transhumanists share the logics of the turn-of-the-century theosophists and theosophically informed esoteric groups, albeit in a reductive, materialistic, and technologically deterministic mode. The above statement, the quote that I mentioned at the beginning by Wired magazine founder Kevin Kelly, that quote-unquote nobody expected the merger of technology and all living nature, including humans, that this development is unexpected, is demonstrably false. The marginalized literature of esoteric groups such as Theosophy and Anthroposophy have, as will be shown, anticipated this development in astonishing ways. The intellectual expressions of Theosophy and transhumanism are anchored in a historical context awash in new technologies and scientific advancement, and therefore share in the utopic hopes and apocalyptic nightmares accompanying such transitions. 2 theosophically informed esoteric groups will be outlined: the Temple of the People in Halcyon, California, with its connection to Silicon Valley, and the prognostications of Rudolf Steiner's Anthroposophical Society, a group whose ideas closely resemble modern-day concerns about advanced technology and the loss of the human. A third example will be offered, if I have time, through the concept of the machine man that was promulgated by G.I. Gurdjieff and its influence on the religious imagination of later technophiles. These case studies point to a link between the logics of esotericism and transhumanism, one religious, the other scientific, a link that many scholars have failed to recognize. So, the Temple of the People. Founded by physician William Henry Dower and Native American Indian activist and medium Francia Amanda Ledoux, the Temple of the People organized its spiritual, scientific, and practical healing aspirations into a utopian theosophical movement called the Temple, later the Temple of the People, in Syracuse, New York in 1898. This theosophical enclave was an American split-off of the official Theosophical Society in Adyar, India, that had laid down roots in U.S. soil under the direction of William Quan Judge. In 1903, the temple community moved to California and settled in the Arroyo Grande Valley, christening their site Halcyon. Once established, they gained a larger following through setting up a sanitarium, offering nature cures, and focusing on cooperative living and communal farming. So here's a picture of the temple is still there, the temple that they built, where they have their, where they kind of do their teachings and their ceremonies. And the other picture, which I think is interesting, is Annie Besant laying the cornerstone, not for Halcyon, but for the Theosophical Society headquarters in the United States, which I think is in Illinois, and she's, as you can see, in full Masonic regalia, doing the cornerstone ritual that a Mason would do, such as the Capitol building was done by George Washington, for instance. She's doing the same ceremony as George Washington, but for Theosophical Society. Here's just another picture of their facility, which is still there and quite interesting. Dower was a believer in the theosophical evolutionary cosmology of involution and evolution, and was convinced that science and technology through means of electricity would bring about a spiritual transformation of both consciousness and the healing arts. He later wrote about an age of radiance, a time when electronic healing devices would cure all diseases. In May 1921 issue of the movement's official organ, the Temple Artisan, he enthusiastically announced to fellow Temple members, who refer to themselves as Templars to this day, that we had in fact entered such an age. According to the internal history of the temple, permission to establish this community was granted directly by the Masters, spiritually advanced immortal beings existing in invisible light bodies and charged with guiding the spiritual evolution of humanity. There are several of these ascended masters in the Theosophical pantheon, but the one who oversaw the Temple of the People and works most closely with the Halcyon community was and is the Master Hilarion, patron of all working scientists. The Master is believed to communicate with the community via the guardian-in-chief of the temple, and through this channel provide direction and inspiration. The Master Hilarion is credited as the author of their foundational teachings, which is what you see here, which the members considered to be of the highest moral, spiritual, and scientific importance. The foreword to the first collection of Master Hilarion's teachings ends with this chilling warning, quote, "There has been a great advance in scientific knowledge, invention, and attainments, and we are harnessing nature's finer forces more and more to our personal and commercial uses and pleasures. But unless rightly used in the spirit of unselfish service and for the good of all, there is bound to be terrible consequences to humanity, engendering the very existence of the planet itself upon which we live." This is just another picture of, if you were to go into these teachings more, like what is in there. They have all of this kind of spiritual scientific ideas that they lay out in diagrammatic form, even like this. In a recent major monograph on Halcyon by historian Paul Ivey, recounts how during 1904 grand opening on the tour of the Halcyon grounds, Dower introduced his guests to his newly arrived X-ray machine. Dower impressed his audience and neighbors by demonstrating the effects of the electrical device and revealing a physically and organic structure normally unseen under the surface of matter, and confirming for them in a practical way the theosophical belief that invisible spiritual forces governed and pre-existed physical matter, including the human body. In this case, that underlying spiritual force was electricity. This practice of showcasing groundbreaking technologies in connection with the body, particularly the body's interior and hidden elements, is one that has come to be associated with the modern techno-milieu of Silicon Valley. This milieu includes a fascination with new, unorthodox forms of technology, coupled with doomsday prophecies and potential utopian spirit tech possibilities. Ivey convincingly shows that the interplay of theosophical esotericism and scientific enthusiasm at Halcyon fostered a cultural space amenable to innovation. This came to fruition in the next generation of Halcyonites with Russell, who was named after A.E., the famed Irish theosophist, and Sigurd Varian, whose parents were important members of the Temple of the People. In conjunction with Stanford University and later MIT, the Varian brothers made invaluable contributions to scientific knowledge with the invention of the klystron tube in the 1930s. These developments played a key role for the U.S. military during the Second World War and laid the foundation for the particle accelerators at installations such as CERN today. The Varians founded Varian Associates to commercialize their technology for making small linear particle accelerators for use in, among other things, cancer radiopathy, but especially for the Department of Defense in relation to producing atomic bombs. By the 1950s, Varian Associates was the largest microwave tube corporation in the U.S. According to Christophe Lécuyer, Varian Associates helped facilitate on the San Francisco Peninsula, soon to be Silicon Valley, the emergence of another component industry, semiconductor manufacturing. Lécuyer reports that due to a major shift in the defense procurement in the 1960s, Varian Associates was forced to expand its production activities and began to manufacture semiconductors itself, as well as scientific and medical instruments. There's their famous klystron. So now we move to Rudolf Steiner. Around the time the Temple community moved to California, Austrian-born philosopher Rudolf Steiner was becoming deeply engaged in the activities of the Theosophical Society on the other side of the Atlantic. Steiner grew up around transformative technologies in a working-class environment in Kraljevac, Austria-Hungary, modern-day Croatia, his father being a telegraph operator on the Southern Austrian Railway. He received a doctorate in philosophy from Rostock University and made a name for himself editing Goethe's scientific papers and complete editions of Schopenhauer's philosophy. At the turn of the century, he joined the Theosophical Society, essentially ending his academic career, and began working enthusiastically as the general secretary of the German branch of the Theosophical Society before splitting to found his own Anthroposophical Society in 1913. By 1904, Steiner was already warning audiences about the dangers of overextended reliance on electricity, the mechanization of the human organism, and the merger of humans and machines. Characterized as an early futurist by one of his biographers, Steiner's ideas were, quote, post-conventional, innovative, and futures-oriented, end quote.
Did he paint that?
No. This, he didn't paint the background thing, but these sculptures in the bottom, those are his sculptures. Yeah. It's a movie that was put out by modern-day Dutch anthroposophists who are trying to explain and develop his version of alternative technology. Building upon the cosmology of the Theosophical Society, he developed his own esoteric system in which, in quotes, the Christ impulse, that's what he calls it, which I would describe as a type of universal yet highly evolved spiritual condition, mediated between two opposing forces, Mephistophelian entities he called Lucifer and Ahriman. The latter, Ahriman, which is what the sculpture is of, was adopted from the Zoroastrian religion, and in Steiner's system represents the god of materialism, abstract intellectuality, and unfeeling mechanization. In a lecture in Berlin, Steiner claimed that in the future, quote, great and mighty forces will ensue from discoveries that will turn the entire globe into a kind of self-functioning electrical apparatus, end quote, a description that eerily hints at the coming World Wide Web. Following the First World War, Steiner upped his rhetoric, making pronouncements in 1917 such as, quote, the welding together of human beings with machines will be a great and important problem for the rest of earthly evolution, end quote. Anticipating something like artificial intelligence, he added that in the future we would, quote, create remarkable machines, but only those that will relieve men of work, because they will carry a certain power of intelligence within themselves, end quote. He concluded, another quote, human vibrations will reverberate in a definite way, will continue to vibrate within the mechanical performance of the machine. The cosmos will bring motion to the machines, end quote. This became a significant concern for Steiner, as he foresaw such developments as paving the way for Ahriman to gain control over humanity. This increase in technological dependency and saturation was connected to Steiner's cosmology, to the mysteries of what he called sub-nature, representing the realm of electromagnetic forces and quantum scale phenomena. Though he explained to his followers that such developments were necessary and played an important role in earthly evolution, as I referred to it, he urged them to cultivate a spiritual life that was suitable to the modern condition as an antidote to being dragged down into sub-nature through the forces of technology. Human beings living in modern technological civilization needed to develop, quote, the inner strength not to go under, end quote, by which he meant under nature, into the realm of the electrical. Another of Steiner's neutral yet sympathetic biographers, Gary Lachman, suggests Steiner's views on technology are compatible to those of the philosopher Martin Heidegger. Heidegger saw technology as transformative, challenging, and yet threatening to the essence of the human being in the world, or Dasein. It's his concept. In other words, technology, especially modern industrial technology, orders in a particular way both our thinking about and our experience of the world. One of Steiner's answers to the consequences of this situation was to introduce the concept of moral technology. This idea was based on an earlier theosophist American inventor named John Keeley, who had purported to develop the Keeley motor, that's him sitting by his Keeley motor in the picture. The Keeley motor purportedly ran on the vibratory sympathy and etheric forces of the operator, in that case Keeley. Steiner's version of this type of etheric technology placed more emphasis on the moral forces of the operator. The machine would not work by running electricity into it, but rather by whether or not the operator was a spiritually good person. Steiner depicted these ideas in his 4 mystery dramas, esoteric theatrical plays he produced to convey his teachings. In these dramas, a character named Strater invents a device referred to in the anthroposophical literature as der Strater-Apparat, or the Strater machine. In real life, one of Steiner's followers, Einfried Pfeiffer, apparently attempted to create such a device based on indications given personally by Steiner, and yet was unsuccessful, to which Steiner concluded that human beings were not yet ready for such power. As if to counter the now familiar tropes of transhumanism, Steiner warned his audience during the war that, here's a long quote from Steiner, application of Darwinism to direct experiments on human beings would have horrible results. it will become possible to use them for obtaining enormous power over men, if only by continual selection of the fittest. But things will not stop there. There would be an endeavor to use a certain occult discovery for making the fit even fitter and fitter. This is 1917, I want to say, something like that. Oops. Steiner insisted that, quote, the human element must not be related to machinery in such a way that the Darwinian natural selection theory is used to determine the working capacity of human beings. It is fascinating that in the second decade of the 20th century, Steiner foresaw and warned against Darwinism being deployed rhetorically to instantiate the merging of human beings and machines and to support certain individuals in bringing about the emergence of a superintelligence operated by AI, or a superhuman race for that matter. So I think I have time. I'm gonna go for it. The final example I have is Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff was born in Armenia during the period of Russian rule in the late 1860s to a Greek father and an Armenian mother. He, like the Russian founder of Theosophy, claimed to have spent many years seeking secret groups and occult teachers through Southwest and Central Asia, as well as in the Middle East, in search of a pristine doctrine of esotericism that had existed since primeval times. According to his biography, Meetings with Remarkable Men, which was published posthumously, and there was a well-known film based on it, Gurdjieff purported to have located these teachings in a hidden Sufi group he called the Sarmung Brotherhood. After being exposed to what Gurdjieff determined to be the genuine esoteric knowledge of antiquity, he set out to promulgate the manifestation of his teachings, which he referred to as the Fourth Way. Historian of technology and religion Eric Davis explains that Gurdjieff, quote, not only synthesized a variety of teachings and techniques into an eminently practical form of esoteric work, but creatively integrated a number of modern psychological and scientific ideas into the ancient goal of gnosis, end quote. Davis refers to Gurdjieff as an alchemical modernist and spiritual godfather of the Extropians, a group from the late 1980s and 1990s whose interests and philosophy could be considered the precursor of modern-day transhumanists. Gurdjieff considered human beings to be machines, always reacting in an automatic way to their environment, never fully awakening but subsisting in a state of somnambulism. Human beings were automatic robots or technologized zombies, entities whose machinery was, quote, on, but whose operating system was asleep. He said of their condition, quote, the law for man is existence in the circle of mechanical influences, that state of the machine man, end quote. The key to escaping this mechanical imprisonment was to hack the operating system of the human brain and install the newly released software upgrade, a version more capable of running at a higher level intelligence capacity. One of Gurdjieff's closest students was the Russian journalist and ardent theosophist named P.D. Ouspensky, who met Gurdjieff in 1915. Ouspensky's book, In Search of the Miraculous, depicts an interview between Ouspensky and Gurdjieff, and through this dialogue, the essence of the Fourth Way teachings is revealed. Scholars debate the extent to which the mature Gurdjieff system was developed fully by Gurdjieff or heavily influenced by Ouspensky, especially his book, Tertium Organum, A Key to the Enigmas of the World, written in 1911, which Gurdjieff had read before meeting the journalist. Among other things, Gurdjieff taught that humans were soulless amalgamations of interrelated yet disconnected parts, or disjointed centers, but through the self-remembering, is what he called it, of Fourth Way work, one could develop soul, being, and self, a higher spiritual state of consciousness and embodiment. Ouspensky had already claimed that, quote, man in his substance is an automaton, in his Tertium Organum, which was heavily influenced by the works of Harvard psychologist William James and the theosophist Annie Besant. As Davis remarks, such ideas, which became an applicable esoteric system in the applicable esoteric practice in the Gurdjieff system, are in some ways prescient of theories of later cognitive scientists who posited consciousness as an emergent phenomenon, organizing itself into an apparent unity from out of a network of connections and processes underlying a seeming whole. It should not be surprising, then, that Gurdjieff's psycho-spiritual techniques and technological analogies have been compared to the Dianetics approach of the Church of Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard, and that Meetings with Remarkable Men was both read and viewed by a young Steve Jobs. So I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you.